Oh my. Today? It's Saturday.
They started as recorded.
All right, we will start our meeting. We will begin with a land acknowledgement, and I'm gonna read tiny print on my phone. Because that's how it came to me. Since time immemorial, I'm gonna start over. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance of wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. Today's land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as Kalapuya Ilihi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions to our communities here and across the lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of their federally recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation. All right, and then we can review the agenda and materials. Is there any adjustments we need to make to the agenda tonight? Okay, and now we can talk about the minutes from the March meeting. Are there any adjustments to make to the minutes?
I got a couple.
Okay.
Page 1. Section 3, minutes from the board. Says Conover shared that the case under review tonight took a lot of time and asked for clarification on how to maintain during confidentiality during tonight's discussion of the case review. Probably take out the first during. Maintain confidentiality during tonight's discussion. Oh, and I checked with the other one. I think it was my reading of it, but I don't think it needed to be clarified. So I guess that's the only one that's really of significance that I found about myself.
They were thorough.
I don't remember what other people said enough to be able to correct their comments, so I figure everybody's on their own for sure what they said, and if it makes sense or not, so.
That's how I do it too.
Okay,
I don't think we have a minute. Do we have a minutes in the?
Yeah, there are 3 attendees now.
Okay. So that can be adjusted at least. Because we have it in video form. Okay, any other adjustments?
I can give it to,
Thank you.
because I understand. You were helpful in putting them together a bit,
Mhm.
the minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
You can just send me that.
yeah, you're getting all of this paperwork when I'm
Yeah.
done, so you'll see the highlight.
Any other adjustments to share? Okay. I think we have to move to approve. I move to approve the minutes as amended.
I'll second.
All in favor?
I
Aye.
abstained, just because I was
You
there.
were here. Okay, so our minutes are approved as amended. We will do comments from board members and commission liaisons. Want to start us off? Do you have any comments? Your mouthful?
No, I'm just thinking about, comments about this case. That,
Just comments.
nice to see you in person, I mean, that's my comment.
Thank you. The police commission this time meets after this meeting, so. On Thursday evening, and they'll talk about the impact weapon policy again, and hopefully get it to a place that is good for, for everyone, so that's my report. Nice to see you.
Oh, me,
Yeah.
no, I got nothing.
Yeah, no comment. Nice to see you guys.
No comment.
We're all here.
Yeah.
Person. First time ever with this group. First time in a few years. For the board, all being together. That's exciting. Okay, public comment, so. I don't see any public in the room, but we might have some public comment from the internet. So go ahead, if you are here to do public comment, raise your blue hand on Zoom, or that's how they do it, right? I see one. Okay. I don't have the thing to read. Oh, no. Oh my gosh.
Is there one back
This is for
there?
you though. Thank you, madam. I read. So usually you just. Or Leah usually tell them what they can do, say their name.
Sure, so please state your name, and your comment. You're gonna have 3 minutes to speak, and the CRB protocols prohibit comment on the case being reviewed tonight. So if your comment is related to this case tonight, please come again next month and give us those comments, because we would love to hear them. Also, if anything technological happens and you're unable to give public comment, please feel free to send them in writing, and we'll get them included in the minutes, and also to all the board members.
And we'll hold up the sign when you
Yes.
have 20 seconds. Yeah.
But, and then I think Rob can unmute them, or I think they can unmute themselves.
To the person.
Hi there, can you all hear me? My name is Natalie. I am a law school student. I also work, I'm at Lewis and Clark Law School. I worked as part of our criminal justice reform clinic's youth legal clinic last semester, and I was working with a youth who had a very negative experience with a police officer. We attempted to help her report that misconduct through the police auditor's complaint form. There was no information on that complaint form regarding a deadline that she would need to submit that complaint within. And so she received a response back stating that she had missed the deadline. They had characterized it not as serious misconduct, but as, let me see. Yeah, so they said that it would not fall into the category of serious misconduct, which has a filing deadline of 6 months, which is only found within the Eugene City Code, not within the information that was provided in the brochure from the Eugene Police Auditor. We brought this up to the police auditor and had some back and forth. We felt that the complaint did fall into the category of serious misconduct, but if it didn't, and would only fall into the one that I believe it needed to be filed within 60 days, just as a service complaint, there is an exception under that same Eugene City Code for good cause for a filing extension. Now, when we asked for either it to be properly categorized or to get that extension for good cause, we received a response stating that it didn't meet good cause because, so we asked for the definition of good cause, and what we were told was it was based on quote unquote extraordinary events. Now, anybody who's been in law school for like a month knows that good cause means reasonable or substantial grounds rather than very unusual or remarkable grounds. And so I'm here to, on behalf of that youth, because this process is very, it's not accessible and there's missing information. And we found out about this, this meeting, and we thought we would bring it to your attention. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Were there more? Were there more hands?
Nope, just Miss Ostro.
All right. Then we can move on to the case review.
Can we just note that we can't, I mean, that we wouldn't respond at this point in time to a public comment?
Right, we
Just-
would, that's,
Right, I just,
Oh,
so
yeah,
she
thank you,
understands
yeah.
that,
that does feel uncomfortable.
yeah, that we're not just moving on because we
don't
want to
care.
move, because we don't want to respond. It's just that how our agendas laid out and our protocols, that we just don't say anything. I mean, if people want to respond at the end in their closing comments to what was raised, then
Yeah.
certainly that can happen.
That would have been my question, when will you have time for discussion?
Thank you.
Sure. It's like I've been here before.
It's like you've been here before and had public comment, because it doesn't happen much. Okay, so now we're ready for the case review. But first, this is gonna be a little bit different tonight, obviously. We're gonna go through kind of the first chunk of allegation, or the first category of allegations, then we're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna go through the second category of allegations, and we're not going to like go allegation by allegation, because I don't wanna sleep here, but, so it's gonna be a little bit different. I think it'll be more kind of broad strokes of discussion.
Yeah,
that
I'm
makes
not
sense.
gonna do death by PowerPoint, so
Yeah.
even though it's all written out, I won't read it all, we'll just hit the highlights. And it is one PowerPoint, even though there's a respectful work environment, and then there's it's one PowerPoint, so we'll cover the PowerPoint now, and then we can put the second part up when you guys come back after the break if you'd like, but there's 4 allegations on that one.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Because we've never had in the history of the CRB a respectful work environment case before. I mean, that being the investigation as opposed to an IA. And so I guess I just want to make sure I understand
Yeah,
how this is before us.
sure. So this complaint came in, if I remember right, through the auditor's office, and looking at it, the majority of it, as you'll notice, the more substantial case appeared to be more of a HR series of matters. So with a couple of instances of apparent misconduct thrown in, right? So this is not unusual for us to classify something as more of an HR focused complaint. And then sort of depending on what's alleged, we formulate how we're gonna look at it. So in this case, we wanted IA and HR to team up to do the investigation along with our office to make sure we're hitting all of the human resources related issues, not missing any of those, but also fully investigating the misconduct in line with IA protocols, deadlines, recording standards, things like that. And then the other part of it, the IA number part of it, was something that was pulled out and originally classified as an allegation of criminal misconduct. Once that criminal investigation was completed, we did a follow-up administrative investigation, so that's why that's an IA number. And then this one's a RWE number, just because we felt that was a more proper classification.
Can I add something?
Please,
This one actually came in internal.
thank you.
Yeah, because an employee had
Yeah.
reached out to someone from the union who reached out to one of our command folks, and then that initial interview was taken place by that. And then I got brought in and then recognized that there were some serious policy issues as well as a respectful work environment, and then so that's how it got brought together.
So just to clarify, I mean, because I didn't go back and look at the protocols for what we can and can't do. I mean, this could have had an IA number in addition to a workplace misconduct
Mhm.
investigation sort of thing.
Yeah,
And then obviously that kind of clears it up that we obviously can do anything that has to do with IA. And so that's why I was just a little concerned that we were
Yeah.
stepping into something, but that makes sense and it's understandable. And I just had been looking at this from the IA, the little bitty one, and then I was like, all of a sudden, oh, now I understand the bigger picture of it. And that's how we get to be there. So,
and
okay,
you get to review post cases involving sworn employees, so really
right.
it can be, I mean, because you're reporting on my work, right? So anything that I get involved in, anything I stick my nose in, you guys can take a look at as long as it's sworn employees.
And there's nothing in your job description that doesn't allow you to be involved in a human resources investigation as well.
No, I think typically we try to have that delineation and reserve the IA process for things that really are misconduct.
Right.
But it's an art, not a science for sure.
Okay.
on that part.
Thank you. Helps me understand how we got where we are with all of this. Okay, sorry, Rob.
No problem. So we've got our review for allegations of deficient conduct, supervision, performance, judgment, work environment, professionalism, respectfulness, and adherence to laws and department policy. So the summary of facts, so Officer B reported the improper conduct of his or her supervisor, Sergeant A, to Eugene Police Department leadership. Based on the allegations against Sergeant A and the involvement of the City of Eugene's Employee Resource Center Department, along with EPD Internal Affairs Section and the Independent Police Auditor's Office, a respectful work environment investigation was launched. The RWE investigation resulted in a spinoff IA investigation for Sergeant A's potential criminal conduct, Officer H. And the IA investigation involved Oregon State Police, the Lane County District Attorney's Office. The Lane County District Attorney's Office reviewed the IA investigation and declined to pursue criminal charges of Sergeant A. So 20 witnesses were interviewed regarding their interactions with Sergeant A. During the interviews, employees discussed Sergeant A's behavior. The employees recounted instances of harassment, sexual harassment, deficient supervision, excessive micromanagement, and unprofessional conduct, behavior below the established standards of an employee of the Eugene Police Department. During his IA interview, Sergeant A acknowledged he or she had signed the City of Eugene Employee Handbook Acknowledgement Form, which stated, "I understand that I'm responsible for reading this handbook, familiarizing myself with its contents, and adhering to all the policies and procedures of the City of Eugene, whether set forth in this handbook or elsewhere." So also in the IA interview, Sergeant A was questioned about the allegations, his or her behavior, actions, and treatment of subordinates. Sergeant A acknowledged some of the deficiencies, did not recall some of the events witnesses reported, and denied some of the events and allegations. And so there's 34 allegations in the RWE investigation. I'm not gonna read each one verbatim. I'll hit the highlights, and then when they get repetitive, I'll pick it up. So we've got conduct, failed to foster a safe and respectful work environment. When Sergeant A inappropriately inspected Officer B's uniform pants. Conduct, Sergeant A failed to foster a safe and respectful work environment when he or she inappropriately inspected Officer B's uniform pants. And then we have conduct, Sergeant A, safe and respectful work environment regarding treatment of Officer B, and then it has a few specifics. And then we have conduct, safe and respectful work environment when Sergeant A rubbed a burrito on the growing area of his or her pants before offering a burrito to a subordinate employee. Conduct, Sergeant A failed to foster a safe and respectful work environment when he or she texted a suggested picture of a person and red leggings with a fire logo, and subordinate employees. Spouse works for a fire department. Conduct, safe and respectful work environment when he or she refused to leave during a medical exam of a subordinate employee's genitals. And then conduct, Sergeant A, safe and respectful work environment, treatment of Officer F, and then the list that was the same as before. So conduct again, Sergeant A, safe and respectful work environment. Similar to before, when he or she rubbed the subordinate's employee's phone against the growing area of his or her pants. Conduct to Officer H, similar as before. And then we have conduct, Sergeant A failed to foster safe and respectful work environment with the phone rubbing in the growing area when it was displaying a photo of the employee's spouse. Then we have conduct again, safe and respectful work environment when Sergeant A inquired about to a subordinate employee to tell him or her about the last time the employee had sex with his or her spouse. We have conduct to Sergeant, from Sergeant A to Officer R, same as before, same list. And then we have conduct, Sergeant A engaged in conduct that brought the department into disrepute when he or she made a sexually suggestive comment regarding an employee's spouse when being introduced to the spouse. And then conduct, Sergeant A failed to foster a safe and respectful work environment when he or she asked Officer K for his or her thoughts about a different gender officer join their team. And then conduct, Sergeant A to Officer K, same list as before. Conduct, Sergeant A failed to foster safe and respectful work environment when he or she asked Officer N if he or she had taken pictures of injuries of an elderly rape victim. And then we get into expectation of supervisors. And it's regarding Sergeant A exercise his or her authority as a supervisor in a disparate manner towards Officer B. And then a similar list as discussed earlier. Expectation of supervisors. Sergeant A exercise his or her authority, supervisor in a disparate manner towards Officer B. Same list as before. And then expectations of supervisor, Sergeant A to Sergeant to Officer H. It's the same list that we discussed before. And then again, expectations of supervisor, Sergeant A to Officer K. The same list as before. And then also expectations of supervisor, Sergeant A to Officer F. And again, same list. And then we get into unsatisfactory performance. Sergeant A failed to perform his or her required tasks as supervisor when he or she asked Officer G to add charges when a K-9 had assisted in the apprehension of a suspect. Then we have unsat performance. Sergeant A failed to perform his or her required tasks as a supervisor when he or she directed Officer F to arrest someone for a cooking fire. And then we get into judgment. Sergeant A exercised poor judgment in violation of policy in his or her conduct as a supervisor. Professionalism, Sergeant A's conduct towards his or her supervised employees was unprofessional in violation of policy. And then we get into the APM, respectful work environment, multiple allegations of disrespectful and or offensive statements and behavior that would be individually and in their totality in violation of policy. Then we get into the employee handbook code of conduct, multiple allegations of disrespectful and or offensive statements and behavior that would individually and in their totality be in violation of the City of Eugene code of conduct. And then we have conduct. Sergeant A failed to foster a safe and respectful work environment when he or she rubbed EPD paperwork on the groin area of his or her pants. Conduct. Sergeant A failed to foster a safe and respectful work environment when he or she requested naked photos of a subordinate's employee spouse. Conduct, Sergeant A failed to foster a safe and respectful work environment when he or she loaned a subordinate employee a pair of uniform pants and made a comment to the effect that now their sexual organs were touching. When we get into conduct, Sergeant A failed to foster a safe and respectful work environment when he or she rubbed a subordinate employee's phone against the groin area of his or her pants. This is different than allegation 8 we covered earlier. And then then conduct, Sergeant A, safe and respectful work environment when he or she would slap EPD paperwork out of subordinate's hands. And then conduct again, Sergeant A failed to foster a safe and respectful work environment when he sit in a manner that displayed the groin area of his or her pants when in meetings with employees. And then conduct, Sergeant A failed to foster a safe and respectful work environment when he or she repeatedly made comments of a sexual nature to other employees. And then these are the allegations for the spinoff investigation that became the I investigation that was one that was reviewed by OSP and the Lane County District Attorney's Office. So judgment, Sergeant A demonstrated poor judgment in violation of policy in his or her conduct with Officer H in the locker room. conduct, Sergeant A failed to provide a respectful work environment as a result of his or her conduct with Officer H in the locker room. Expectations of supervisors, that Sergeant A failed to meet the expectations of a supervisor with Officer H in the locker room. And then adherence to laws, that Sergeant A's conduct with Officer H violated ORS 166.065, physical harassment. Yeah, that was-
We're out of time.
that was
Time to go home.
And then I won't read these. So there's 34 allegations in the RWE investigation, and there's 4 in the IA investigation. And in totality, it was auditor 26 sustained, 12 insufficient evidence, chain of command and chief concurred. Auditor was 28 and 10, chain of command and chief were 26 and 12. So 26 sustained, 2 insufficient evidence. I'd lose my voice probably if I read all these. So. And that's the IA, all sustained on the IA. And these are our standard, was it internally generated complaint, as Ryan discussed earlier. The relevant sections that are covered in the different manuals. And then there are the adjudication recommendations. In totality, the 2 together. And there's the information provided. And then here comes my outdated slide. I need to get a new picture. So. And then I will turn this off and let you guys take over the show.
All right, so in terms of the respectful workplace violation, policy violations. We're gonna start with our investigation classification discussion. Alan, you want to start us off with that?
Sure, I think that that is the like primary category of this whole case is like, why was A able to, I don't know what the verb is for predator, but to behave this way for as long as A did. And I would encourage the department to really look at that issue and use this as an opportunity to self-reflect and learn where it failed, because we should never see a list that long. So many officers, quite a few officers were victimized and their workplace turned ugly. And it should just not have taken that long. So that's I think this case is really about why and discover how to not have that happen in the future. Thanks.
I appreciate the meticulous classification here. I think the amount of allegations there are represent like the pervasiveness of this behavior, and like this was definitely a pattern that created, and the fact that it was a supervisor, I think, created a toxic workplace environment. It's disturbing. I appreciate how thorough the investigation was after the fact. But these kinds of behaviors in like a law enforcement setting concerns me for how anyone else on the outside is going to be able to report these things. I will say that after the fact, here we are, that most of the allegations were sustained. And this isn't you, but the fact that the district attorney thought that they didn't need to do anything here is discouraging. But on classification and investigation, I'm dissatisfied.
I think it's one of those situations where one of the excuses used by Sergeant A was surprised by coming into this department and hearing the it was friendly place, but hearing the sort of joking that went on in the department and bordering on, it wasn't the word crude, but basically that's, I mean, what it was. And I thought, in all my time that I've been, and all the officers I've known and all my contacts, I can't say that I have seen that and didn't see that 25+ years ago, when I was really working with them. And knowing how times have changed, it would really surprise me that this sort of discussions that Sergeant A seemed to say was commonplace, was really commonplace. Which makes me think that when the one person who's making the comments all the time thinks it's commonplace, it's because they're making the comments all the time and no one is stopping them. And, you know, in the 70s and the 80s, you know, certainly, you know, racial humor in many parts of the country was still, you know, bantered about, and tolerated and not kind of put in its place as it is today. Still not put in its place in probably lots of places, but, you know, I think it's, you know, where we've gotten to. And so it's not surprising to me that Sergeant A saw this as, you know, kind of an acceptable thing in this, that the environment in EPD has fostered this or allows this or encourages this, and that's how the people are. I think probably part of the reason it went on so long is that they weren't a sergeant for that long. It was, most of this was happening, you know, with a peer. And I think all of us that have worked any place for any number of years have worked with people that it's like, well, that's just how they are. And you just kind of, yeah, okay. Because it's like, there's no changing them. And so I guess to answer the question about why it went so long, that to me, it's like, that was part of it. But then when they became a sergeant, it obviously, you know, took it to a new level. But sergeant didn't see themselves and is any different than when they were a colleague. And that's why it kind of, I think, continued. I think answering the question with regards to why the DA didn't take it more seriously, you know, in the 80s, it was, you know, when there was domestic violence, the victim of the domestic violence, if they said, I don't want to prosecute, I don't want to be involved, the DA just said, okay, fine, we'll file. And then over time, you know, there was the realization that, you know, we can't let the domestic violence victim make this decision. That we need to prosecute these, even if they don't think it's what they want to do. And so I think that's probably where this is that, you know, it's like the officer coming forward finally was something that could substantially be a crime, was just like, no, I don't want to do that. And they've got enough crime that they're dealing with over there. And it's like, okay, they don't want to prosecute. Why should we kind of keep going with it? And the work environment, I mean, you know, there's lots of other reasons I think that fall into this. I think the length of time it took to investigate this. I mean, it was obviously very thorough. It encompassed a lot of people. I mean, I can't imagine the number of hours that, you know, this took to investigate. I thought last month we had a lot of time, you know, I mean, a big case, and then it was like, I opened this up and it was 347 pages. Oh my gosh. And so I appreciate that, you know, where we were with this, you know, the intake, the classification, the monitoring, I think, you know, everything was done really well. I think it gave a new perspective for me as far as how, you know, how IA works with human resources. I mean, I never really stopped to think that, you know, they did that. I kind of figured human resources did their own investigations. And wouldn't pull our poor little overworked sergeant into the whole thing. Anyway, so I mean, that's where I am with regards to intake and classification. That's a lot.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that it struck me that some of the allegations include the word disparate treatment of officers when this is actually like the treatment of officers. And I wonder, you know, how that is taken into account in policy, that there's, so when, for example, the Federal Department of Justice looks at a police department, they're looking for patterns and practices of behavior. And that is when it leads to really significant impacts and changing of a system. And so this is obviously a categorization of a pattern and practice in terms of the length of the allegations and the number, and that most of them are sustained. But I wonder if there's a way for policy to capture and this idea of pattern and practice in a more direct way with a higher level of seriousness, rather than sort of the little bits that accumulate to that. But in terms of what's available to classify and then the investigation itself, I agree, is seem to be. Have been done well.
It was hard to figure out the allegations, I'll admit that.
Mm,
It was a lot.
yeah, yeah, I bet. Yeah,
Sorry.
that's
And
unfortunate. I'm done.
Okay, yeah, the concern I have is that. Where do we draw the line between HR and police auditor
Mhm.
office? So many of these things are aspects of the human resources department where you have allegedly bad conduct in the workplace at the city. Now, does the auditor's office then in charged with putting more double charging? Or do we allow the HR department to do their thing and process the person through that process?
Mhm.
I don't understand necessarily, because I think you have the union situation with the officers that makes it interesting. Plus, the police department wants to have its control over its employees so that it maintains its command structure. I think ultimately, I don't think that the ultimate decision on this particular case is going to change much. But I do wonder about whether we're spending a lot of time in two separate areas where it could be handled in one.
Mhm.
So I just am troubled by that. I wrote down some notes, but I can't read them, so it doesn't make any sense. But that's my concern about it. I don't know how you guys wandered through that and came up with how you did it, but.
I can speak to that a little
That'd
bit.
be helpful.
Yeah, so so historically. We've had times where complaints have come in that definitely feel more like this is an HR issue. This is someone complaining about someone's overall behavior at work. And there's nothing that sort of crosses that line into what I would consider misconduct, right? It's just poor supervision, micromanagement. All the sort of generalized things that I would send to HR.
I think a lot of this stuff was.
A lot of the stuff was,
Having
yeah.
someone come back to the
Mhm.
headquarters, being picky about
Yeah.
reports, all that stuff, as far as I was
Micromanagement.
concerned, that
Yeah.
could go out the window.
Well, and I think in the past, we've had some complaints come in that are just that, right? And we send them to HR and HR does their thing and it varies, they have their way of doing investigations is very different than the IA way of doing investigations. And tell me if I'm wrong, what I've noticed with represented employees is often they prefer the IA process because they know it, they have all heard it, they can open up the police manual and look at it and see exactly like what the dates are, who's gonna get notified, they know there's gonna be recorded interviews, like all of that, and the HR process is a little more fuzzy. So in cases where I see, and this is one of those things where it's in the classification decision, I had one actually like this week where I'm like, this is HR, I don't see any specific misconduct that would benefit from me and IA doing a look at it. It's just generalized, I have a problem with this employee and, so that's kind of where I draw the line is if it's 100% HR, I send it over there. If there's aspects of it that I think either could or have already turned into potential misconduct, then we do this melded process. And I think what happened with this is actually it started out as HR and Ryan and HR were doing the intakes together. And then as things started to come out that sounded a lot more like misconduct, I actually remember the phone call. Ryan's telling me all the things that had come out and I was just like, oh, because to me, it was just, there's a lot of specific misconduct here that would benefit from it. What I like this process more.
Who's gonna make the ultimate call on whether this person remains employed? Is the issue.
That would still be the chief, whether it's HR or us, it's always up to the chief.
Okay.
As the city manager, that's.
All right.
Yes.
Thanks.
And do they have the same process with regards to sustained insufficient or That's just verbiage that's used because it's in this process, but they don't use that in the HR process, if you know.
They do. They use the same.
Thank you. I think you did, but I
I
just
don't
thought
have
I'd
to
ask.
oversee the HR ones either, so.
Right, okay.
You done? I know we can't talk discipline, but is it possible to know if they're still employed?
He's not a current employee.
It's helpful.
Why are we protecting that person?
So,
Because that person is connected with 27 other people in this process. And if that person's name is out, then potentially all the other people who participated in this and that were told at the beginning of their interview process, we're attempting to keep confidentiality. And so I think it's just how it needs to be.
agreed. I think the investigation was very thorough, very good. I really appreciated it, how at the end of each interview, Sergeant Nelson said, do you know of anybody else who might be connected or any other things that you've heard? You gave a lot of opportunities for people to be clear and honest and open. I think the classification was fine. I do appreciate that it went through this process, because I feel like by going through this process, it has more likelihood that it will become public information, which it is tonight. I mean, as public as we can. Where with HR, it probably wouldn't be. It would be more sealed. And I think, to Alan's point, that we see one person doing this, it does make you wonder if this is a systemic problem. And the fact that this was investigated so thoroughly does give me faith in the process that it might not be a systemic problem. And that if it becomes a systemic problem, then it will be handled. So I appreciate that it's an IA instead of HR, or in addition to HR, or however the cards fell. There was one more thing. It was not important. Maybe Jose will say it. Go ahead.
No pressure.
Nothing guaranteed on anything important, of course, but. I think I can see why the auditor picked up on this case. I guess we also discussed it too, so. Self-fulfilling. Anyway, as it communicates some. Difficult facts to the public, but it also communicates I think some important like procedural questions that I had the same question that you did, Rick, like where do we draw, what's the threshold between like a run-of-the-mill workplace thing and misconduct? And it's hard for me to pinpoint like at what point did this turn into misconduct, but it seemed like altogether it's like something greater than the sum of its parts kind of allegation. I don't know. I think one of the things that this communicates is that I mean, the importance of unions, even for police officers, when that might not be a public sentiment right now. And I think it's important to communicate that police officers are workers too and fall under the benefits of unionizing. Also a shout out to the officer who spoke freely, and where speaking freely means speaking truth despite the consequences. So I think that's also something good and important to communicate to the public. The narrative reads like a cross between Super Troopers and Twin Peaks, in the sense that I was really I'm sorry.
That was perfect.
Yeah.
I don't know Super Troopers, but I know Twin Peaks. We'll just go with that.
The sometimes blurring between horrifying and comedic. And in that sense, on page 60, I just don't know how to read this. I feel like this has to be pointed out that the investigation at the bottom there asks Sergeant A if they ever rubbed an officer's phone on their genitals. And the following is taken directly from the transcript. When reading the transcript, my statements are captured as Q and A. So the investigator asks, can you describe to me how you would do that? And Sergeant says, well, do you want to hand me your phone? And investigator says, did you really just say that? No, I'm not gonna hand you my phone. As just this like. Total, like, over the head, just like, and that's what seems to me to be both like horrifying and comedic here is that like. This person was so unaware of just how terrible this whole thing was. So I don't know, I appreciate the fact that EPD is working on communicating these difficult truths and like, I can't imagine that this was difficult to, or easy to investigate and yeah, appreciate the hours and just a mountain of work that this probably took to investigate something like this. So, yeah.
All right, that was everyone on the first one. Is there any follow-up after the go around?
Can I just ask, how is discipline disseminated to the rank and file? Is that a fair question? I mean,
Like,
is there a synopsis of not, even if it's anonymous to the officers, do they get to digest how their fellow officers are getting in trouble or not getting in trouble?
I can talk to that a little bit, Alan, and I really appreciate your comments at the very beginning about this, because we started talking about a police organization and we look at culture and the things that we see in this, and I'm sorry you guys are having to see this. I mean, it's gross. And we look at it and go, and I don't remember who said it, but I mean, how does this occur and how do we deal with it? So the good parts that come out of this is, first of all, officers are willing to talk to us. And so the willingness to talk to us and actually explain everything to us builds trust. But to circle back to your point, after I adjudicated this and everything was said and done, went back and met with every one of these employees. And I talked to them about what had occurred, as much as I could share was shared with them. And in every single one of those conversations was left with, we have to have trust here. And if this stuff is going on, you've got to bring it forward to us. A lot of these shifts were at nighttime on weekends where, we don't have a lot of executives around and there's a lot of trust given that our supervisors are doing the jobs they're doing. So there is follow-up, there has been follow-up with those employees. There has been check-ins, and as much as was possible, they were advised as to what the ramifications were of this case. And I'll try to be very careful as I say this, but the mere fact that that sergeant is no longer employed with this agency speaks volumes to the officers. So hopefully I answered that question as much as I could and kept dancing.
Yeah, and while you're answering, I realize too, that the officers are free to view this meeting and see the materials. And so if they want to track discipline, they have that opportunity. I have heard of some departments that digest the discipline and make it available to the officers because it's helpful information to see how people are getting into trouble. Thank you.
That is such a good idea, or I like the idea of having like a rubric for discipline, so officers know if this allegation is sustained, this is the discipline. That's been brought up before too, so we're not seeing like officer and then we say the name had this discipline, but we just know like it was sustained.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying it would be, that would
I
be
agree
helpful
with
to
you.
the officers to hear that, oh, yeah,
Exactly.
that kind of conduct and been sustained. Yeah, not what
Right.
happened to the person. No,
Sure,
I'm
no,
not.
no.
I know that I like to go there, but I'm not going there.
I'm agreeing with you here, that like having a system in place that shows discipline would provide that transparency without having to say like.
Yeah.
That sergeant, whatever,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next section, which is the policy practices training. Right? That's what we do.
yeah.
Monique, could you start with that?
So I have a question. Are there any trainings like specifically and explicitly on like sexual harassment?
Their own thing, yeah.
Okay. Like, can you, like, do you think this kind of thing, like this kind of contemporary or modern type scenario is covered?
With the phones? Sorry.
Phones, yeah.
Sorry, that was,
There's a lot
I
of
don't know why I
situations.
clarify that. I'm so sorry.
Some of this just seems like it's so common sense that it's like,
Yeah.
how do you train, how do you even bring it up in training?
Well, we, at the U of L, every student is required to go through a scenario or like a training called Let's Get Explicit. And they're just scenario-based trainings where they talk about like just different real world incidences that you could perhaps extrapolate different scenarios. But I feel like. I can't imagine a training like that with police officers, but it should occur, like being really explicit.
So there's a sergeant, you should do this, not me. No, it's not my area. I don't. Well, I was gonna say thank you. There's a sergeant's academy when people get
Yes.
promoted to sergeant, and I actually don't know if we were doing, the other complication here is that a lot of this was happening during COVID, and so like when DC Adams was saying with not a lot of execs there because it was nighttime, they also weren't there a lot because it was COVID. And so I don't know if they were doing sergeant's academy.
I don't know if that Sergeant A went through the Sergeant's
Yeah.
Academy or not.
There is now,
Yeah, everybody does now,
yeah,
for sure.
Ilya, can I speak to that for a second?
please do.
I mean, the groundwork on all of this stuff that's in here is taught and retaught and reiterated and reiterated. And I mean this quite literally from the first day that any employee in the city comes in the door. And when much like what you're talking about, maybe not to the depth of the scenarios you're talking about, but there is training, it's ongoing training. Our police officers go to the academy, they get the same training there, they come back, they get reiterated training and in-service training. I mean, we talk about harassment in the workplace, innuendos, all the things that we see in this case, which was, articulated there in the APM that we have. There's no excuse. All our officers are provided this education, this training, and it continues. But the Sergeant Academy has been revised now. And so we have a 2-week Sergeant Academy where these very things having to do with sexual harassment, any type of harassment, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is hammered by the city right now. All of this is reiterated in our Sergeant Academy. So there's extensive training and ongoing training in these areas.
One of the things that I thought about, like, why are we reviewing this one? And while I appreciate others thinking this was something helpful for the public to know about, I just kept coming back to a phrase that was used in law school, which was it just is just inviting the prurient interests, the idea that it's just like a shameful, morbid curiosity with nudity and sex and, and that's kind of what it just felt like. It's like, as we were reviewing all of this, as I was reviewing all this, that was kind of the reason. And so I kind of, as I was thinking about that, it's like, what's the takeaway as the civilian review board, for the agency? And I couldn't really come up with anything because, like Rick, it was like, this seemed like it was a lot of, maybe it was the background when the person was hired, maybe it was, this is HR stuff. And while I understand the blending between HR and, the conduct that, was borderline criminal or criminal, depending on, which DA you take it to, I still couldn't get away from, it's like, how does the public knowing about this, helpful? And then at one point, the sergeant said something that just, I had to like stop it several times because I wanted to write down the quote. It was, there are things that happen in police buildings that if the general public know would shock their conscience, things that cops find humorous that would shock the general public. And I thought, that's that person's perspective on the humor in the police department that I don't think is shared by the majority of the Eugene Police Department. I mean, I think, yes, correct me if I'm wrong, officers that are in the room, you're always going to find people that are going to find this kind of thing humorous and think it's humorous to bring it into any place. I mean, I am one that can cross a line pretty doggone quickly and then go, oops, that was really the wrong place and the wrong time to say something and backpedal. But I think this is the exception, and I'm not sure how helpful it is for us to be reviewing it from that perspective, which then leads me to, I'm not sure that there's really much training, that we could suggest to be done, because I think the training's already being done. I think the only thing is keeping the lines of communication open, that when someone has this kind of humor, it's like, if you don't feel like you can say something, it's saying something to the sergeant. Because I think some people, they're so trained to not, not make an inappropriate joke, whether it's racial, whether it's sexual, whether it's, towards gender, any group of people. And they're so shocked when they hear it, they don't know what to do. And so I think sometimes it's like we try to be so correct all the time that when somebody is so blatantly incorrect, you don't know what to do. And so I think in this case, I don't think there's any shame on the officers for not bringing it up sooner. It's just, you just kind of think, okay, please just let this be a one-off. And so I appreciate that the sergeant's training, that's going to happen. But I kind of sometimes think we end up over training to deal with a problem that really has resolved itself by leading the agency.
Yeah, I'm actually struck on the training front. I kind of agree with where you're going with that line of thinking. And what I'm struck by on the training front is that I don't know if the training is different for faculty at the U of O versus students. It may be the same, maybe different. But this reads like the training. Like this reads, it's not the same.
We don't go through scenario-based training.
Oh, I did.
Well, I didn't.
At all.
No, I did.
As a faculty.
As a faculty member, I had to go through scenario-based training. It was ridiculous. And yet, this reads exactly like the training. And so I guess my question about, or like my little comment about that is, I wondered at the time when I was taking this UO training, like who needs this training? This is ridiculous. And yet, like, there are people who need this training. And so I wonder if the training is matched to the need, and I know that I'm not a person who designs training, and so I can't speak to that. And I know it's also handled probably by people who are not in this room, it's an HR sort of citywide question. But in other conversations that I've had about citywide trainings on equity, on sexual harassment, there has sometimes been a mismatch for things that are actually happening and the trainings that are being delivered. And that either it's something that you can just ignore because it's so ridiculous, like I kind of did with that training because it was so off the wall, or it's something that is not landing in some other way. So I do wonder if there's like just a look at the training potentially to see if there's some way to align it. But again, I do sort of agree. I wonder if this is also a one-off, and maybe you all can speak to that in terms of observing patterns of complaints related to this kind of behavior, or your own personal experience as someone who has previously dated a police officer, not in this department, luckily, so I don't have to have those weird misalignments. I do know that there's, cultural things that are like team-based, and that it's hard to rid cultures of. So I wonder how you would respond to that sort of just, is this a one-off in your opinion, or is it a pattern? And I don't think you can respond immediately, or you don't have to, but
Sure, I'll
this is the
respond.
question, yeah.
Yeah, but you're new here.
Yeah.
That's true. Well, I got 4 years in, I think it counts.
3 years of COVID then.
Yeah, true. This is a one-off. You guys heard Chief Skinner speak last week when he came in the door 5 years ago. And we had discussions before I came down, recognizing that there were some things about the culture in the Eugene Police Department that we had to restore, and particularly the very thing that the chief talked to me about was restoring trust from management to our representative. And, we've worked hard on that, and we've continued to build relationships. And if you hear Skinner talk for any length of time, he talks about relationships and people. That'll be in everything he talks about. And so the whole goal here is to, increase communication from the lower level of the department all the way up through it. So to the point of this is, the city designed training programs are exactly that. They're plug and play. And you're right. It would be nice if we could, do something that would be a little bit different, that would be more directed toward the things we're seeing. Whether that's a possibility or not, because of the nature of the standardization of the training, I really don't know. But this incident's a one-off. And how I know that is we're not seeing these with frequency. And the ones we are seeing, there's a lot of debate. We have one now that we're talking about where we're not even sure how to classify it because we don't even know if it's really a respectful workplace complaint. And so if we had other issues, we would be seeing it, and I think we would be hearing it at this point. And I would be remiss if I didn't say we're on the cusp of promoting 4 new lieutenants and 9 new sergeants. And as soon as that promotional process is done, we're gonna bring them all in the room. We're gonna talk about culture. We're gonna talk about leadership. And we're gonna talk about where this agency goes. And to your point, you're absolutely right about every police agency has its own identity and culture. There's no question about it. And the goal for every police agency is to constantly be lifelong learners and improve what you're doing and improve that culture and be representative. And, let's just look at what's happened over the last 3 or 4 years. By the mere nature of some of the things that have turned some scrutiny on the law enforcement, we've had some very positive changes in the police cultures. So I anticipate that's going to continue, but I really believe, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're much deeper seated in the organization than I am. This is a one-off.
Well, I agree with that. I think there's another piece here that's important for everybody to understand too is. I remember this was a lot of years ago, but as a brand new police officer, you come in and what I always did was I put my head down. I didn't really talk to anybody. I worked hard and I wanted people to know me by my work product, right? So, hey, he's a hard worker. He does a good job out there, all of these things. And so this was kind of a little bit of a perfect storm too, and in respect to the fact that the team that the sergeant had was all very, very brand new officers. And so they were really trying hard to make a name for themselves and not. And when you're younger like that, sometimes it's hard for them to think about rocking the boat and stepping up and saying something to somebody. I have absolute 100% confidence that if this same behavior would have been happening with a little more tenured officers, there would be no way that list would be that long. 100% confident in that. So it is kind of a perfect storm. I hear you guys talking about, is this a cultural thing? Is this going on all over the department? I've been here 21.5 years. I think I truly believe, no, absolutely not. It's not happening. And when I got this one, I realized, gosh, this was just kind of a perfect storm. We had a whole bunch of baby cops and we had a supervisor who was doing the things that they were doing and they didn't want to cause waves. So.
Yeah, I think you saw that in reaction of Officer B. Before that person went on duty, every day they had almost a meltdown.
Yep.
And I think probably that was because that person didn't want to rock the boat.
Yep.
And I think the difference between training per se is that automatically if someone wants to train me on stuff like that, I just tune them out.
Yeah.
And I think this is maybe more effective when they find out that the force will stand up for protection people. And at one point I wondered, well, one of the officers reported, well, he's kind of creepy, or that person's kind of creepy. And you just have to kind of move beyond that. Well, that's not. We got to move so that people understand that being creepy is a symptom of some other problems. And I think that the fact that this was handled it points out to the rest of the force that there are people behind you and they want to improve the culture. And I think that's important. That was all I really had to say.
I have a few things to say. I think I'm not gonna. This isn't gonna make any sense, the order. I just have notes to talk about. So the first one is, just like, okay, I'm gonna training about training. So as a teacher, we have to do a sexual harassment training every year. Like it's a repeated thing. It's something that you do on the internet and it's very easy to turn it on a browser, walk away, the time runs out, you take the quiz. It's very easy to do that, especially when you do it every year and you're like, I know this, and kind of like what you were saying, Clay, like, this isn't for me, this training, like I get it. So I'm hoping that's not what this training is like. I'm hoping it can be more like experiential, like how a lot of the trainings are. At least every 5 years, you do something more tangible than a little like set it and forget it kind of thing. And then also I'm curious about training, not just for the harasser, but for the harassed. Is there a training where the people are explicitly taught how to speak up for themselves or how to report? Because that's also an important training to do, especially with a younger, newer force, or, newer teachers, newer everything. Is that part of the training, you know?
Citywide training, yes.
Yeah.
So every city employee is taught how to, initiate a complaint.
Okay,
But it's a very good point that we're nuanced in the police department. It's a little bit different because we do have structure and hierarchy. Might be something for us to look at, think about.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then just the practice of promoting, I'm curious about, like, if this person. I think Bernadette was saying this, when they were not a sergeant, they were acting, they potentially were acting like this. How is it that they got promoted if their peers and if everyone around them is seeing this kind of behavior and it's a one-off?
I think, if I remember right, you guys are more refreshed on this than me, because did not go back and read my entire report again, but I think that was some of the questions that I asked, and the behavior, that behavior was not really witnessed prior to promotion. So I think that's kind of one of those where, some people act differently when they are providing power. And so I did ask some of those questions. I don't know that I asked it to every single person. I know that in general, what we got was that, yeah, we didn't like the way he worked, didn't like what he was doing, but none of the behaviors that were identified in this investigation were identified prior to his promotion.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry,
No.
just for clarification on that. Any of our promotees have a full 360-degree performance review prior to being promoted. And then that'll come to Chief Skinner and he'll make a determination, he reviews that. So we do due diligence to do.
He said
You did great.
No gold star today for me, but that is done. And so, but it's consistent or contingent upon us getting the information and identifying, having people speak up about some of these performance issues and personality conflicts.
And so do they then go back to the officers that are being supervised by a sergeant or a lieutenant and say, how do you feel this person is doing? Do you feel like they're supporting you? Do you feel like, is any of that part of the review process? Of,
Like, is there a probationary period? with
yeah,
the
acting
promotion?
sergeant or acting lieutenant position?
Yeah, so there is an evaluation process. So 6-month probation, if not a year, and I apologize, I'm not sure exactly if it's 6 months or a year, but there has to be a recommendation for an end of probation, at which point who's ever doing the review should go back and do a 360-degree evaluation of the candidate. So, but I'm going in early, no, it would be 6 months or 12 months into probation.
And then the time off policy. Just the fact that so many of these people were talking about, like, not wanting to come to work and using up all of their personal days, and like, do people get that back? I mean, I don't think you can
Yes.
really answer. Okay,
Yes,
I guess you can answer.
those people were reimbursed for time.
Okay.
Yes.
And then this is maybe just an aside, but when we're talking about, one of your questions that you asked Sergeant A repeatedly was, how many times did you rub something like X against your genitals or Y against your genitals? And they often said, like, I don't know, I can't really tell you for sure. Can I just put it on record that the correct answer, that should be none? Like,
Quickly
quickly
should be none.
quickly, because you know that you have never done that.
Yes.
It shouldn't be something you have to think about or justify that, like, oh yeah, this guy and I sometimes do that, like. It's not really a policy, maybe it should be a policy that, like, we don't rub things against their genitals, but
The follow-up question, on the outside of my pants or inside my
right,
pants?
we
Is that
really shouldn't
follow-up?
also have to quantify or qualify any of this. I'm being glib, I'm going to let you.
Yeah, I just want to say that, in a roundabout way, this is one of those difficult things where I don't see this as a place where training or policy are the places for action. Practices is something a bit more difficult to pin down when we're not talking about bureaucracy. Oh, on either end of that scale. Practices is kind of like what we're talking about, like cooler, water cooler talk. We don't want to legislate that. But at the same time, we also don't want officers saying in an interview, he's made comments about kicking me in the ding dong. I mean, it's just the the context is so off. And in that sense, through this, I felt really, I'm a bleeding heart university professor. I feel for Officer B and like hope that their career isn't ruined over this. And, you know, it makes me think that whether or not this is the example or the exception to the behavior, at the end of the day, we seem to have the effects of what's going on here. The magnitude of those effects is kind of overwhelming when we look at the list of officers. And yeah, I don't think we review cases based upon whether it's an example or exception, but because they warrant review. Is that, I don't know, is that right? Is that the philosophy here?
No, I mean, one of the reasons I suggested this one is because it touched so many people.
Yeah.
And because I think that there are ripple effects. I mean, it was in 2021 and I remember it, right? Like it comes up whenever there's a lot of people run into. So I don't know. I mean, that's one reason I suggested it, one of the many. That's a good question about the philosophy for review. I think it depends on who's
Sure.
who's sitting in those.
I like to think that they're picked with some intent behind, but it's like practices, implicit bias is just something that's super difficult to name and identify. And civic institutions are slow to change. And that's not to like, dismiss anything here, but to say that like, I mean, there are still pay discrepancies based on gender in the city. So, we're doing the work of this in a way that, yeah, might resist training or policy, and need to figure out how to talk about it in different kinds of ways. And I think this is helpful, like getting it out in dialogue and talking about it is one way of thinking about how we might have some kind of control or agency over it. It's not necessarily a recommendation, but yeah. I yield.
When I was reviewing this, it made me nervous, not because I thought it was a cultural thing. I had no sense of it being, it made me nervous because it was a hidden thing and it was discovered. And I think Ryan spoke to that point, and that is that's why this is a good case for this board and a good case to air for the public, so that the department gets reminded, like from a policy standpoint, you said it, it's staffing. It's like, don't ever let that storm happen again. Don't put rookies with a brand new sergeant. I mean, that's a clear step that the department can take to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And then on training, what about training the officers in this case? What about bringing them all in, the whole rank and file, and having a training about this happened? And you know what? This just happened a year ago, and this happened here, because it's about training the people to speak up. Deputy Chief, that's what you said. You met with these individuals after this and said, thank you for, but the training opportunity here is, it's great that the sergeants are getting trained, but it's to your point, it's the rank and file that needs to really be encouraged to speak up and not have any of this, harassment, not humor. It was sexual and workplace harassment. The conduct was, exposed the city to liability, all of those things. So, I think there's a real training opportunity there. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so for the adjudication, we're certainly not going to go through each one and vote. Yeah, we're not going to. I think,
Just closing comments.
yeah, just maybe closing comments on adjudication and just say like, knowing that this person is no longer employed, that kind of helps with the adjudication also in my mind. So maybe we'll just kind of go around and.
Two things that came up when you're talking about the trainings, the scenario trainings. I know that in the police academy, or in the citizen police academy, and I think at the same time they talk about things that officers have done, and it's like they use them as trainings for later trainings, like when an officer like goes in a particular way with a dog, and they then use that as like, was this the proper way to go, or how many people would say yes, how many people would say no, and so I guess I see this is probably a similar sort of thing, except that it's again, I think it's so big and so, kind of like, how can anybody think that this would be okay things to be saying and doing at work? So yeah, I guess it's like, it wouldn't take a lot of training other than don't be stupid, don't say stupid things at work. It's like, that seems like what it should be, right? But I think, yeah, keeping the lines of communication open for new officers, I think they're the ones that need to be told time and time again, if you hear something that sounds off, here is the person you go and talk to, whether that's the deputy chief, whether that's HR, whether that's IA, whether that's the auditor. I mean, it's like having somebody that is kind of a point person to take those things to say, you're right, that kind of humor is not appropriate. That kind of action is not appropriate. Those kinds of comments, those kinds of looks, all of those sorts of things. So I think that, incorporating this into the training is, I guess, kind of, I look at it a little differently, that you're always going to have the problem that the newer sergeants, correct me if I'm wrong, get stuck with night shifts. Newer officers coming on, they get the night shifts. So, you're almost always going to have the newer officers that are finally out of the cars with the newer sergeants that have just been promoted, unless, unless you don't have a promotion process going on at the time. So it's kind of just the nature of the beast, it's like you hope that in those field training times, they're getting all of that, older officer wisdom put upon them to know who to go to, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. So I appreciate that all of this was done. Just my takeaway is that I didn't need to read it all.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I would say in response to that, and then I'll say some other closing comments, is that I guess it could take organizational change to think about changing that behavior of assigning new sergeants to night shifts and all new officers to night shifts. That is an option. Like that is something that the department could choose to do. But I agree, it's well, I just go back to the fact that this could read as the training that I went through, and I would look at it and be like, well, obviously, don't do that. So like, to your point, you could use it as future training, and yet it still would fly over a lot of people's heads. So yeah, it's a hard thing to deal with. Something is so egregious as this. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a culture of feeling. There's just so much involved with power dynamics and with probably age for entering into a profession, sometimes gender, sometimes, other factors in someone's background that make people vulnerable in a way that does not encourage telling on someone. And that's just like a societal cultural thing. And so I wonder if, in addition to knowing who to tell, also knowing about, for officers to also know about the protections that they have explicitly from the department, not just from their union, but, to know that there are consequences when this behavior happens, and to know that it's like normal and appropriate to report it. And it's like a very difficult realm of work to do. For any large organization. And so I respect that it's going to be a learning process, and that there has apparently been a lot of work that has been done, if this doesn't feel like a cultural thing and more like a one-off thing. But I feel like there is always opportunity for improvement. So maybe that's where.
Can I offer something just to hopefully rest your mind a little bit? Our team goes every time we have a recruit academy and sergeant academy. But even the new recruits, we present an IA training. And even though everyone knows you have to tell the truth, whatever you do, don't lie. It's a common sense, right? We stress it. And we could certainly incorporate some information about this topic with our brand new recruits to kind of set the stage of, we want you to be able to trust us, and we can absolutely add this into
Invite
we don't-
Officer B to tell her story if she feels like.
We don't need to
it.
re-traumatize people though.
Right.
Well, if she wanted to, if she thought it would, if they wanted to, if they thought, but.
Yeah, and
We could absolutely just add that to our list of some examples of, because we kind of set it up as we want you to be successful.
Yeah.
We're setting you up for success. Here's some things to not do.
Laura Magana probably comes up in that conversation, right?
Well,
Yeah.
not explicitly, but
But-
yes. But
Well,
yes.
That
yeah.
comes up when I explain why I'm there.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's just so important because often, well, I don't know if this is true of the Eugene Police Department, not Bureau. But I did it. I just imagine that there is some like level of skepticism of internal affairs and of, not skepticism, but like wariness of internal affairs or of investigations, sometimes. And so knowing that it's also there for them, right? Like that's the message too, because we ask so much of police officers in every community and it's like such a challenging job, just the basics of it, that having a workplace that doesn't feel comfortable and supportive is like just so awful. So knowing that that is also an arm of internal affairs and of the auditor's office too, that's a protection that you are providing as well, which is, I think, important.
I can say that you've gotten through to them in terms of telling the truth, because all the cases I've seen, I would think that the first response you get out of Sergeant A would be when asked, have you done this before? And the response was probably, the first response I would have expected would be, oh, no. But you did get the truth out of that person, and so that was effective. On the other hand, there were some other things that there was some judgment lacking, but I'll echo what Clay said about in general. I agree with what he said.
I don't think I have anything to add here, just. It's a lot of allegations and a lot of adjudications and. I agree with them.
Yeah, the one thing that I want to add is, I think is important and helpful to, think about what you said, Carolyn, when it comes to thinking about how we treat, the people who are subject to this kind of, workplace harassment. And it's nice to hear that, the leadership is involved in following up on this and not letting it, I see it as a workers' rights issue again, and that it's attending to the working conditions of officers ultimately enhances the safety of the community. So, yeah.
As a lawyer who deals with pay issues, hearing that they were reimbursed, like that never happened. I mean, that's a huge thing. To me, that really speaks volumes. So kudos for that. I just think that to a point that was made earlier, this process identified that staffing at night in the pandemic caused conditions for this to happen. And to hear that it isn't set in stone. Sometimes people have to work at night, even if they're experienced. And I think the lesson to be drawn is that you should never have, the takeaway from this is don't put a whole rookie crew out there. And I hope that is considered. And unfortunately for the men and women who will have to work at night again in their careers for a little bit of time, I feel for that. It's painful, but if it's going to enhance the safety of the workplace, then it should be done. Thank you. That's it.
So I agree with the recommendations of having more experienced people at night and not just having a staff of rookies. I think you had said that executives aren't there at night. Is that true?
Executives aren't there. I will say though, there is watch commanders. So
Right.
lieutenant level watch commanders are, and Alan, that's where your experience level is supposed to catch this where we have a deficiency or shortage or shortcoming. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add about.
Okay, before we break, we're a little bit late. I just wanted to feel the room here. I don't have anything else to add for like the second go around for case review. I feel like everything that I've said has been said. Is that the case for everyone, or did you save some stuff for the PLM? You saved some stuff? That's okay.
Oh, I could just say that I just got confused. I thought they were two separate. I kind of only, I don't want to say I only reviewed the second one. But I kind of reviewed the second one. I thought the second one was what we were talking about. I didn't realize the 34 allegations was kind of what we were talking about until like
We had a
earlier
pleasant
today.
Conversation earlier today.
Yeah, because I couldn't figure out why there was only a 6-minute interview with the sergeant. And it was just like, where are all the
We
questions?
must have a big training topic.
Yeah, I was like, all of a sudden, anyway, so I mean, I don't have a lot to add.
Okay.
So, but it was basically just, I guess. It was just trying to figure that out. It was like, this is why notebooks work for me, and I realized that I didn't ask for a notebook early enough. Right, but
That is.
I guess, see, and I know if I didn't ask for it soon enough.
The last of our papers.
I'll bring the green with me next time I come, but, because that's where I got hung up, is like thinking that we were just doing just this little bit, and it seemed like we were looking at it in like a little under a microscope. And I was like, why wasn't anybody else talked to? Oh, that's that 347-page document that I haven't quite gotten to, and the hour-and-a-half interview. Anyway, so I guess it was that confusion for me, but maybe it was just me.
No, I was confused too. I will
Okay.
say, yeah, if there's, I don't know if we've talked about this before, I think we have, but if there's some way of like. Giving just an outline of like what you should definitely pay attention to and,
Yes.
yeah,
Vicky's probably laughing because I intended to do that.
okay,
I told Vicky I was going to do that
Yeah.
and then I.
sure, yeah.
So
Well,
I
you're doing a
have-
lot of other stuff, yeah.
But no, I did consider it, but
Sure.
I will try to do that.
Or even if it was just like an introductory paragraph that
Yeah.
just said,
Yeah.
you're going to have
Yeah.
34 cases that talk to a lot of people.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that's kind of overlaps between HR and IA. And you're going to have one little specific thing that is more IA related that you're used to looking at.
Yeah.
Then I kind of would have gone, oh, and prepare to spend about 14 hours.
That was the plan.
Then I would have, yeah.
I mean, great
I would-
minds,
yeah.
really.
Yeah.
I would have started.
Compared to what Ryan's.
Yeah.
Oh, right. So anyway, so that's about all. I guess it's always one of those, it's the choosing the cases, is, an interesting thing. And then it's just knowing how we're supposed to best use our time. And so it's like understanding really what the case is before we get everything.
I'll try and do better.
You're supposed to do all your homework, Brenda.
I'm like Cliff Notes. When I was in high school, couldn't find them in college and law school, but I still somehow survived. So yeah, I want
Can we
Cliff
put this
Notes.
in Chat GPT?
I would like to also point out that this is a volunteer position.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, so you're getting ready to resign right now?
no, you can, but what I wanted to say is that I think that. There's no like real obligation to read every page, to watch every video, to listen to every interview. I feel like. I'm just saying, Leah, you can join the committee when you're retired, but, and then you can tell us. But like, I didn't listen to everything. I listened to the things. to the point
Absolutely.
That I felt I understood it. And I missed some things, and that's okay. That's why we have 7 of us, and that's why we're not paid. And
It sounds like we're shutting things down and could I say something?
well, I do want to talk about the schedule. I do feel it. Bernadette, do you feel like you were able to share everything?
Yeah, I don't have anything more I need to really talk
Is there
about. in that
anybody else
particular
who
case,
wants
so.
to say anything that we didn't get? Okay.
She does.
So I know, I see your hand. I just wanted to make sure that everyone else on the board has had the opportunity. And then we don't have much left to do. Do we want to skip the break is my next question. If
Can we take a break?
Let's take a break.
Okay, Leah, go ahead and then we'll take a 5-minute break.
All I wanted to say was, that realizing that you guys hadn't looked at this one yet, I was like, oh my God, because it was such a massive part of my work in 2021. And actually, like, when we did our annual report for 21, Lindsay put together a wonderful graph showing how we had fewer allegations in that year, but more specific allegations, basically more things I was investigating. And so Ryan did an insane amount of work on this. And it just took up a lot of my time. And that was in the time when I was understaffed. So it was important to me that you all see it partially just because it looms large in my mind, but I think it was important. I hope it was important for folks to see how importantly we treated all of this. Because I think as someone who, in my first few workplaces, none of this behavior would have been
Wouldn't hit the radar as being inappropriate.
right. It would have been fine. And so my hope is that as we can treat these things more seriously and openly and in open meetings discuss that this kind of stuff is not okay in the workplace. That helps us get to a place where if that happens, it's easier for folks to know that we will treat it seriously and it won't be a cultural problem because they know that it's not okay, right? So it's important to me to talk about it in a public meeting for a lot of reasons. Not just, as I told Bernadette, because I worked really hard on it. So I appreciate all of your thoughts on it, and I just, yeah, we bring you a lot of serious stuff when we bring you some strange stuff, and this is both. So thank you. That's all. Thank you.
All right, let's take a 5-minute
Yeah.
break, 5 minutes, is that good?
Sure.
Yeah.
7:00, are we going?
Yep.
Okay, the next thing on our agenda is to elect liaison and human rights commissions. I nominate Bernadette.
Second.
That's
pretty
fun.
All right.
Hi.
Congratulations, Bernadette. Bernadette, you're the new human rights liaison. No, is there anyone who would like to do this?
I'm happy to serve as a liaison. This year, it may be a challenge. I mentioned this to you for the last meeting. I will be, so it would be good to know the schedule for the Human Rights Commission,
Third Tuesday.
and if they're meeting over the summer.
Typically, they have August off. And I don't know.
Yeah. This is part of my closing comments, is that I'm gonna be probably unavailable for the July, August, and September meetings,
We don't do an August.
which we don't do in August meetings, so that's good. But simultaneously, I would be missing both CRB and if it's monthly Human Rights Commission or any other liaison position. So if there's someone else who wants to take that on this year, I'm happy to serve in some of those capacities in the future or this year, except for the fact that.
We did nominate second and vote you in.
Yeah, so this is only. in case you were asked.
I'll put this notice in that I'm resigning from the civilian review board immediately. If,
All right.
that happens.
Is there anybody else who's interested in taking this on? All right, then I will nominate Clay with. Seconding, okay. With the stipulation, whatever.
And they have somebody that comes to us kind of sort of from time to time, so,
They used to, yeah.
so we get people.
Pre-excused absence, Clay, I vote yes.
Yes.
You voting, okay, voting yes. Clay, you
Thanks.
are
Okay, great.
the Human Rights Commission.
We have such. confidence in you.
Excellent.
And we elected Alan last month, for those of you who are not here, to continue the police commission.
Good.
Yeah. Next is auditor report.
I haven't read that yet. Sorry, okay, luckily though, I met with the mayor last week, so I had to write down what I was doing. Okay, number one, we had our CRV. We've got all of our applicants as of March, end of March. Thank you for real time. Not very much. And I'm finishing up my memo with the result of our selection subcommittee, 5 folks, I think, weigh in on that. Beatrice is going to speak. We have our public safety forum coming up on May 2nd. Yeah, I said I was gonna make you speak, didn't I?
Sorry,
Yes.
This will be the fourth time that we hold our public safety forum for the Latinx Spanish speaking community. It'll be Tuesday, May 2nd at Willamette High School. We will have a table for the auditor's office, and if anybody is interested in joining us at that table, we would welcome you. It is primarily in Spanish, but we'll have some capacity of Spanish speaking people at the table, so we can help you connect with folks. And it consists of, it's a 2.5-hour event. The first hour, we have a bunch of organizations tabling, connecting, sharing resources. And then the second half of the event is a Q&A session where we'll have select panelists. We'll have EPD Chief Chris Skinner and a bicultural officer present to answer questions, address concerns. And we'll also have an immigration attorney, somebody from the city rental housing navigator to answer rental protections and rights. And somebody from the school district will talk about safety in schools. So that'll be what I'm working on for this next month. And I have a flyer finalized. I'll send it all to you guys so that you can share with your networks and hopefully help me get the word out about the event. So I'm excited.
Did you say May 2nd or May 7th?
May 2nd, Tuesday, May.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Oh,
What time was that?
6 to 8:30.
is there food?
There will be food.
Oh,
Delicious food.
Good stuff. Thank you, Beatrice, for working really hard on that, and obviously we haven't been able to do one in a while, so we're pretty excited to get those restarted. As of last week, because I didn't pull the numbers today, we've had 94 complaints so far this year, so that's pretty on target, but we definitely had a lovely little surge there at the end of March. We've had 53 shows of force, 30 uses of force, so we've reviewed all of those. Interestingly, we've had 7 pursuits this year so far. There were 10, I believe, last year. So that's something I need to look at more. You all know there was a change in the pursuit policy, so I believe that's something to do with it. So I'm looking through, so those get reviewed by the training emergency vehicle operations supervisor. They get reviewed to say whether they're within policy or not. Typically, we look at them and have a to see if they sort of hit that, oh, that looks like actual misconduct, like that is a violation of the pursuit policy, appears to be a violation of pursuit policy to the degree that we want to take a closer look at this, right? So we'll take a look at those too. I'm gonna kind of look into those and see like, hey, you know, what is in policy now, what would have been in policy before, and just kind of, I'll be talking more about that coming up. For those of you who were around when Mark was here, he really liked talking about pursuits, so I would feel like I was not.
Could you maybe send us a copy of the old policy and with the new one? Side by side, so we can take a look and see what we're looking at.
Absolutely.
Everyone.
Yes, I can do
you'll
that.
get us some crib notes on that?
Bernadette won't read them.
No, Rick's gonna give us an executive summary.
Cliff notes.
There you go. Thanks.
The reward for good work is more work.
Mhm.
That's what we're doing. Okay, sorry. Let's see, speaking of which, I believe we are setting up 2 dates for us to go back to council before the summer break. Looking at hopefully May 17th and June 14th. I think probably on that first one, we'll just be doing our annual, we will be doing our annual report. And then the next one, we'll talk a little bit more about what I talked to you all about last month with the protocols and where we want to go with potentially renegotiating those. Have I been up to so much stuff? I think I told you all, I'm on the annual conference committee for the National Association of Civilian Oversight, so that was fun. We met over spring break to go over the 92 proposals for presentations at the conference. It took a lot of work, but we got through all of them. It was great. We're very excited. We're going to be part of a roundtable with folks to talk about different models and how they all pluses and minuses. But it's looking like it's going to be a really great conference, so I will get that information to you all too. If you're interested, let me know. I would need to do some budget magicianship, but I think we can figure something out.
Where's the con?
Chicago. Let's see. Another thing we haven't done in a while, but could probably come back to. EPD put together a video, an informative video, or they are putting together an informative video on officer involved shootings and what happens afterwards. And so I went over and I talked for a while on that. I don't know what I said, so we'll find out. I did my best. But just talked about sort of our role in reviewing those and how that all comes together. I did want to comment related to the public comment that we had earlier. That was a closed case. It would have been in the January closed case reports. It is a closed case involving a sworn employee, so if anyone wants to review it, we can definitely include that. If you also just want to give me a call and find a time to come in and talk over it, I'm happy to do that as well. It just depends on whatever the group wants to do, but it's a closed case, so it's available for review. And I should say, I believe, I mean, we have all the video and all these reports from that, so it wasn't something that was just dismissed and never looked at. It was dismissed after a review of that video and those police reports. Let's see. I think that might be it. I think that's all I got. Am I missing something?
Can you comment on the good cause?
Yeah, so historically, good cause has been very narrowly interpreted, and that's actually one of the things that I brought up at council whenever I went to council to talk about potential changes to the system. Good cause has been interpreted so narrowly, and I think, so what I did before that presentation to council is I went back and I looked at cases that have been dismissed for timeliness. Because one of the things that has come up as far as ad hoc committee and other folks has been, why don't we change our timeliness limits, which would involve a change of the ordinance. And so what I found was typically if there was a more broad interpretation of good cause, and I should say that the very strict sort of interpretation of good cause is from the city attorney, from like, oh man. Sorry, I blanked out there. I think it's as long as I can remember. It was after Glenn came in house, but yes. And so my thought when I look at that is if we do a more general interpretation of good cause, that would actually address the issues that I sometimes see with the timeliness limits. So that's one area that we are looking at. But right now, based on legal advice, it's just very strictly interpreted.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right. I appreciate y'all showing up. This is nice of y'all.
Fun. Fun to have you, but-
I'm sorry to interrupt. So, I had a quick,
I'm sorry, we can't take public comment again, but if you want to send me an email, Natalie, I can give you a call this week, okay?
And I think a few of us are probably going to make comments with regards to what was
Yeah.
stated earlier, so.
And I think that's where we are right now.
Is
Yeah.
that?
Questions and comments. So, Clay.
Who I start? I'll be interested to hear what these other comments are. because- can I ask a clarifying question about the Human Rights Commission and
Yeah.
how that procedurally happens?
Of
Is
course.
does someone notify someone else and then I get some emails about where I'm supposed
It's a
to be?
very
and
good
when?
question.
Okay.
Yes, so typically, so it's a little different. So with police commission, you actually like, there's this whole thing with city council, but you get appointed
Yeah.
as a member. Human Rights Commission is way more low key. So basically, we let their staff know that you have selected your liaison, and so you'll get that email where me or Beatrice or Lindsay or Rob will be writing you and.
Connecting the dots kind of.
Yeah, and then just get you together, and then they will let you know. They do the third Tuesday at 5:30. I think they're still virtual, but I'm not entirely sure on that.
Okay.
And it's like 15 people, isn't it?
It's a big group.
It's a bigger group, yeah.
And historically, we've had a member come from that.
Yeah.
To hear it,
So
yeah.
Abraham Coulibaly is their representative. I don't think he has,
Yeah.
but it's been recent that he was appointed, so I'll make sure to check in as well. And they don't meet July, August, or December, so.
Great,
Oh.
so I'll miss one.
Yeah.
Perfect. My closing comments are, it's nice to see everybody here.
I have no comments.
I have no comments.
I didn't expect it to go that fast. You're supposed to say more. I just want to say that I appreciate the work that the auditor does. And I feel like this is a good use of everybody's time here, so thank you for doing the work that you do.
No closing comments. Thanks EPD people for being here. It's very helpful. I think it's enhanced the process a bit to get some
Yeah,
real-time
totally.
feedback, so that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Are you gonna speak on that case?
I know.
Okay. So is there any, like, are you able to give like a quick rundown of what happened? Wonderful.
While Leah's pulling that up, I do have a comment that came to me. As the chair and the vice chair, we're always like to hear input on what cases you all would like to be reading. So that's always an invitation that when you get the closed case list, go through it and see if there's anything that stands out. Otherwise, we tend to just pick from what we see. And I think that my term will be up soon of being chair, because legally I can't be chair after this.
We just appointed.
I know, the next time we appoint, I'm ineligible.
Why would you bring that up, Brett?
I'm just saying, if this is something that you're interested in, the choosing of the cases, we're thinking about that. I mean, and in the next like 9 months until my term is.
You're still looking?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll make my comment then. So I think, there was a question I had about, there was an incident that was received on March 27th, 2023, where it was a complaint from 2.5 years ago, that said it couldn't be investigated for misconduct. And my note was, well, what if it's egregious or criminal? Can we go back and look?
So.
And my response was to myself, as I questioned myself and wrote the note down, well, of course, if it's criminal, they can go back. And if it's egregious, that would be good cause. So I answered my own question as I was doing that. But I thought I would bring it up because I thought, well, that's one of those things that, needs to be discussed. That, it's like when things are being investigated, or what it's saying, it can't be investigated for misconduct, that we should all remember that it's like, well, I mean, it's like if it's something egregious or criminal, that it's still going to hit the radar of the auditor. Then on the March closed case report, I was interested because there's a case that was, the unsatisfactory performance was November 16th. And then it was received on December 27th, and it's already closed. And I noticed that because I thought, well, that's really good work. I mean, that means that somebody, auditor, somebody, internal affairs, somebody, Leah and Lindsay and Rob, I mean, it's like there are people that are working pretty hard to get something going through that quickly. So to me, that's kind of like we're through the other side of COVID, slowdown, where everything just like was slow.
All of the things.
Yeah, I mean, it was slow. It was hard to get things done. It was hard to find people and to do the interviews and just all the extra hoops that got put in the way to do things. So it was, after looking at this case that started, I mean, it was like, there were comments that were talking about things that happened between January, March of 2020, and then things through 2021. And then, and now here we are in 2023, finally discussing it. And so I appreciated that the contrast to the fact that there's something, obviously probably not nearly as big as this one. So I just appreciate that. I also wanted to make my final comment, is that now the tragedy that happened in Louisville yesterday was in sharp contrast to the tragedy in Uvalde. That, I mean, obviously one was a bank, one was a school. I mean, there's lots of differences, but still that the officers got there in 3 minutes and just went in. I mean, tragically, and a couple of them were shot. I mean, one of them is in very serious condition, 11 days on the force, out of the academy. I mean, it's a tragedy, but knowing our officers in Eugene, I feel like that's the response that we're going to get in our community, is we're going to get the response that Louisville had, which is they're going to go in and they're going to stop a threat, and they're going to stop it quickly. And I really appreciate, and I hope it gets back to the department, how much we appreciate knowing that's what our response is going to be, that there's the trust through the chain of command, that the officers on the ground are going to know what to do, and they're going to get in there and they're going to get the job done. And so I just, I wanted to pass that on. So there you go.
Thank you. I want, just quickly, I should say, so the limits for timeliness are also for the auditor to open in the investigation, right? So that does not limit the police department from doing an investigation at all. It doesn't limit any police department from, like in the case of a criminal allegation, right? So it's really whether I'm allowed to open it or not. In my experience, I think that's all I'll say about that. I was looking at this. This is one that Rob took a close look at. So I was wondering if it would be helpful. Well, I can just tell you. So we got a complaint that in August, there was a call that officers were rude, excessively forceful, and may not have Mirandized correctly, and then took food from the recording party were the things in the statement. And so we took a look at the video and the reports. And then I'm wondering if it would be helpful, we could just send you all the packet this week. Can we do that this week? I guess I volunteer that and then I won't be in this week. But why don't we send that all out to you guys and you can decide? Does that sound good? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good.
But you had mentioned earlier, essentially you all looked at that,
Mhm.
you reviewed it for,
Because if it had been serious misconduct, we
Right.
could have opened it.
right, and you just closed the case / dismissed.
We had classified it as an inquiry, we looked at it, we did not find serious misconduct, and so since it was outside the 60 days, we dismissed it for a lack of timeliness.
Right,
Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's
Rob.
correct.
Okay. Yeah.
and can you just describe, just so we can communicate that we heard this, and
Mhm.
can you describe what it is you were able to review about that incident? That you were able to go through that process,
Yeah.
just like broadly,
The same as what you guys reviewed tonight, body
Yeah.
cam footage, police reports, statement.
so you all as
Professional
professionals reviewed quite a lot of information and analyzed it to say that there was not a serious.
Yeah,
Didn't follow up though with
That it was-
officers.
Officers were not interviewed and nobody,
Right.
no witnesses were
Absolutely.
interviewed, but
Yeah.
the materials that are available. were-
Yeah.
yeah,
And it wasn't, you didn't classify it as unfounded.
No, no.
no,
And it would have gone over if it had been 60 days or less.
Right.
But it didn't meet the.
So it had to
criteria.
meet a criteria for timeliness that is very strictly defined in the ordinance that created this whole system.
Correct.
yes,
And so you have looked at the definition of timeliness, no,
good
of
cause.
good cause,
Which is not defined clearly.
which is not
Well, I
defined.
She's relying on legal. counsel.
Right, but I mean, it's one of those things, when you see it, it's the best way.
Right.
She's asking for
Yeah.
specific, but.
I can show you the good cause memo
Right.
that we've had.
And as an office, you are considering what the possibility would be for looking at that definition in the future.
Yes.
Not related to this
It
case.
Not
it can't
to this
relate to
case,
this case,
but-
but for future.
It would be
process.
helpful to everyone.
Yes.
Us, the public, EPD.
Yeah, and so actually that's. When I say about going and talking about renegotiating the protocols, that's one of the things that I think could be looked at in that renegotiation.
Right.
Because right now, it's basically, we got advice from city attorney, it was around the formation of this office. And so if all, if our office, the police department, city, and the union can all agree that good cause could be a little more expansive, then we don't need to change the ordinance language.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, because changing the ordinance as a whole
It's a whole
thing that is very difficult to do.
Yeah.
And so just to communicate back to the public who may still be listening,
Mhm.
there is a process that you are looking at that is related to this case, but wouldn't change the outcomes of this particular complaint. That would help better the process of,
Yes.
It's not
reviewing.
related to this case, related to an issue raised
Yes.
by this case.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly,
Related to an issue that is probably related to multiple.
multiple
Right,
cases.
yeah.
And unfortunately for this case, the definitions of how you can operate limited the ability for you to look into it.
Precisely.
Well
Look at you, did that way better than me.
You can say bureau 6 times for that.
Smooth.
Well, and what I have seen though is whether it's within 60 days or outside of 60 days, there are a lot of cases that they do exactly what they just did. They review the video, they read the police reports, and they say there's nothing here.
Mhm.
And so I'm pretty confident in how they do that, and come to that decision, even without the timelines. That there are things that just kind of go by the wayside because there's just nothing there.
Mhm.
It's just like, people either misremember it, not say in this case, people are making complaints, they were extremely intoxicated when they had contact with the officer, so they don't remember anything that happened, or certainly not the way it is, mental illness, there's all sorts of reasons that they see things, review them and.
Another reason I'm very grateful for video. It doesn't
Yeah.
tell the whole story, but it helps a lot. And I'm also very grateful for my team because when I was dealing with this case, I wasn't able to watch the video of all the uses of first moment.
When you send this to us, can you include like the classification, like what the allegation would be?
You want to know the classification that it would have been if timeliness hadn't been an
Yeah.
issue?
Yes.
If it would have been classified as an allegation.
It wouldn't have been classified as an allegation, it would have been at service complaint level, so we can,
Okay.
I can explain
Yeah.
that, I can show you,
If there
I'll
was
send a
a-
little flow chart that shows you that, like,
Thank
where
you.
that would go,
Yeah,
yeah. I
Yes,
love my
you
flow
guys can
charts.
handle that.
Yeah, and just to reiterate for the public who may be watching, that means that all of us will have the opportunity to review the processes that this went through in more detail, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And be able to comment on it at our next meeting.
And I will say also that is one of the reasons why we typically reserve at least one meeting during the year for you all to review things that have been not elevated to an allegation of misconduct, so you can check me on my classification standards, so. Always one of my favorites.
We've done it like last year.
We haven't done it for a
Oh,
while.
we almost always
Usually
usually,
in June,
Yeah,
isn't it?
I thought it was
usually-
usually August, September, so the new
Some
people,
summer.
yeah. I won't be.
like reading,
We'll wait and do it when we answer.
Yeah.
That's fine.
yeah.
Okay,
You can decide
Um,
where it's only trained.
are there more closing comments? Did you get your closing comments? Sorry.
I just wanted to know the nature of that case, but I think I'm gonna get more information.
You are. Okay, cool. And you closed your comments,
Yeah, I talked while she was looking things up.
okay. So then we can adjourn, and our next meeting is May 9th. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
I like to say that with a question mark.
Leave your notes with the
Yep.
public record
With us.
folks if you